you explained to us by drawing on paper how dev cycles are typically slow because the org hasn't put much thought into, designing the process of ideation to launch. And that was extremely interesting. So talking from your experience of building product and engineering from ground up, how does, thinking in system helps here?
The topic that we took that day for PRDs and slow dev cycles, it was interesting to me because it is something similar to a doctor diagnosing a disease in a patient. So slow dev cycles, long PRDs, these are all symptoms of some kind of some underlying problem. Slowly you are in a cycle that the PRD just keeps getting longer and longer and longer, and the cycle takes much longer. So it's a symptom, underlying symptom. It started off as a trigger somewhere else, and maybe initially you might have seen really good PRDs etc. coming in, but then over a period of time other behaviors have emerged in the system, and it's now been so long, many months, you forget what gave rise to this symptom. So being able to see this system playing out, that's a superpower when it comes to product management.
Hi everyone, welcome again to another episode of PM School's Minimum Viable podcast. Today we have Joe Kochitty. He brings over almost 13 plus years of experience. He's a vice president at Epic. One interesting thing about his career is he's been into product management almost all his career, right? He's also an ex-IIT Bombay alum. Welcome to the podcast, Joe. How are you, man?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, Joe, great to have you on the podcast. And I remember, I reached out to you for recording a podcast 6 to 7 months back, and met you in Goregaon. And you are an advocate when it comes to thinking in systems, right? And the day we met, you explained to us by drawing on paper how dev cycles are typically slow because the org hasn't put much thought into, designing the process of ideation to launch. And that was extremely interesting. Talking from a PM's perspective, right? Like I have worked in teams, also Nikunj has worked in teams where, we would write, let's say a quick 1 or 2 pager PRD for a feature, right? And while the delivery by tech will be super quick, it will come at its cost. And on the other hand, I've worked in teams where we would write a 30, 40 pager PRD. I remember telling this to you as well. For the same feature, and many times I would hardly see the light of the day. So talking from your experience of building product and engineering from ground up, how does thinking in system helps here?
Got it. It was an interesting conversation that we had, and I had come prepared with a bunch of papers also for that.
Yes.
There's not a lot of people who talk about systems, at least not in the field of product management. There are a lot of systems thinkers in other fields, especially manufacturing, because it has been there for some time and people have applied it with very good results, but not in product management. The topic that we took that day for PRDs and slow dev cycles, it was interesting to me because it is something similar to a doctor diagnosing a disease in a patient. So slow dev cycles, long PRDs, these are all symptoms of some kind of some underlying problem. So long PRDs by itself is not a problem, because in some industries you require it, especially when there is heavy regulation, etc. So long PRDs by itself is not the problem, but sometimes it is a symptom of an underlying problem. Slow dev cycle in some cases might be necessary, especially if you're sending someone to space. You need to be very careful, but a lot of the times it is a symptom of an underlying problem. So there are many more symptoms that can be there. And what thinking in systems helps you to do is, like, instead of trying to address the symptom, which is what most of the advice that we find in the internet also, of how to speed up your dev cycles, how to write better PRDs, write better PRD templates, etc. So these are all addressing the symptoms. So instead of looking at the symptom and trying to fix the symptom, being able to think in systems allow you to see what the underlying problem is and be able to address those problems. So that's why PRD and slow dev cycles was very interesting, and it's also something that was relevant to our domain of product management, because there are not many examples of systems thinking in product management, and I was trying to have some of those examples so that I share it with my close of people who work with me. So I'm not very open enough to share it to the outside world because I'm not very comfortable doing that. But at least to the closer group, I was creating a small set of examples that I can explain to them. So now, if when you look at product management in general, if we try to map out why PRDs and slow devs might be connected, that gives you a glimpse into what the underlying system might be. For example, there might be many triggers as to what leads to slow PRDs and long PRDs and slow dev cycles. One example that I can take, and there may be many other, just like there can be many diseases that lead to a fever, there can be many reasons that lead to these symptoms. One of them is that, let's say a leader joins, a product leader joins, someone like me, but I come from a background that says, I need my PRDs to be perfect. They have to be detailed out. I put a lot of value on well-written PRDs. And then I come to a system where that was not the case. So then I try to enforce it in a certain way. And I bring a certain approach to enforcing it. I say that, your PRDs will undergo reviews, and you have to follow a certain template, because I've seen that all of these things must be covered. So your template has XYZ things that has to be mentioned. And so the product manager under this product leader, they adopt their behavior to this new information, and they recognize that this now my evaluation will happen on how good my PRDs are. So along whether or not my output is good or not, are definitely going to be evaluated much before the output of my effort is going to come in. So they spend disproportionate amount of time writing their PRDs, making it longer. And if you look at it, a small scope doesn't allow for a very impressive PRDs. You just wanted to do something small, your PRDs is not going. So in some way, the scope creep happens. And so your scope increases, your PRD gets longer and longer, because now you are going multiple reviews. Every person who does a review will give something that gets added. Nothing gets ever cut out from a PRD most of the time. Everything just keeps getting added to it. And so when you go to the dev team, ideally you should be doing this along with the dev team, but such a process, the dev team wouldn't be too interested in just beefing up PRDs. When you go with a much longer PRD, they're going to take a much longer time to do it. And so over a period of time, the sense that everything is slowing down, earlier releases were happening more frequently, now it's slowed down, but no one really is able to pinpoint why it's happening. And so the friction increases, the stress increases between the teams. And of course, when dev slows down, the first place you look at is the dev team. So now they feel as if they are under the spotlight in a certain way. And they would also want to safeguard. It's like an autoimmune response. They want to safeguard their peace of mind. And so they would say, we are being penalized for even small mistakes, one small slip here, one small slip there. So the way they can do it is by saying that, does not take on any work that has uncertainties in it. So they will push back on a PRD and try to make sure the PRD is well documented, so that there's nothing in there that they haven't figured out. So the engineering team will also start pushing back on the PRDs, back and forth. Slowly, you are in a cycle that, the PRD just keeps getting longer and longer and longer, and the cycle takes much longer. So it's a symptom, underlying symptom. It started off as a trigger somewhere else. And maybe initially you might have seen really good PRDs, etc., coming in, but then over a period of time, other behaviors have emerged in the system. And it's now been so long, many months, you forget what gave rise to this symptom. So, being able to see this system playing out, that's a superpower when it comes to product management.
Thanks, Joe. Like, super interesting. I love how passionate you are about your frameworks in general. So just digging a little deeper, let's say a new product manager has joined your team, right? And this person has no idea about how you approach like a certain problem or in general like systems, right? If you had to sort of train that person, how would you sort of try to like get this person up to speed with respect to systems design and systems thinking, right? Thinking in systems being so important for at least the way you approach your product problems day to day. Can you give an example from your experience? Maybe like someone who had recently joined, or maybe someone like earlier. How do you sort of like train folks like early product managers into this like way of like product management?
Right. I can approach this person in two ways. One is journey into systems, and second is how I try to get my team also into this particular way of thinking. I'll start with my journey. which is how did I discover systems. So what happened initially was when I started working back in 2010. 2010 is much closer to 2000 than it is to now. Which so the books I was reading were much from the 2000s than later on. And I joined as an analyst in a business consulting firm. So I was very eager to read a lot of business books. So I read a lot of, almost every book that I could get my hands on. Harvard Business Review was very big at that time, especially in management consulting. So I read almost all the books that I could get on, and I felt very overwhelmed because it seemed that I couldn't be a good manager unless I knew all of these principles. You have to do this and that, 3 ways to do this, 4 ways to do that. There are hundreds of frameworks, and it just felt too overwhelming for me. And I was in that mode for almost 4-5 years where I felt this is it. This space is so complex that at least even if I can't apply everything, I should be able to apply as many as possible. And that was a very very difficult time also for me in the first 5 years, because in that, of course, I went from consulting to product management within a year, and then to Toppr as a first employee, and then built out a team. So all of this happened in the first 5 years itself. So and whatever I was reading, I was supplying. And so, and this, I know that this is also what everyone else was also doing, because if I see some change in decisions happening in management, I would just walk over to the CEO's desk to see which books they were reading, and I would get a sense of where the directions are coming from. And so this is a very common thing that happens. At some point, it so happened that I was reading some certain books in parallel, which seemed to be completely unrelated to each other, but somehow very interconnected. So one of those books was a book called The Fifth Discipline. It's largely based. It's written way back 2000 or 90s. It's a classic book from that time. But so the examples are from manufacturing, etc. But basically, it talks about something called a learning organization, and it had an example similar to what I said for PRDs, but from the supply chain perspective. And there was another book by Amy Edmondson called Teaming, which spoke a lot about psychological safety and how that one particular factor is by far the number one factor that affects the productivity of teams. And then I was reading another book called Never Split the Difference, which is for negotiations. And it's a very different take from your standard negotiation tactics, and it approaches it completely differently. But somehow all of these books were fitting together in a way that I was starting to see that the underlying principles are kind of similar. And on the parallel, I was also doing some bit of computer cellular automata kind of explorations, which basically said you can have complex behaviors emerging by just very basic rules. So all of these were starting to fit together. And that's how I started to see that there is a field called system dynamics, which tries to predict how behaviors of complex systems will emerge. And a lot of these folks, especially Amy Edmondson and the author of The Fifth Discipline, I realized that they have an academic lineage that they are in some way connected to the field of system dynamics. So Jay Forrester is one of the pioneers of so someone who worked with him, someone who worked with him, and so on. You have a connection between Amy Edmondson and system dynamics, and you have a connection between many other stalwarts of different fields, but to the field of system dynamics. So I started seeing it and started actively exploring if someone that I liked in a certain field, for example, if you look at Deming, which is for quality and quality management, especially in the manufacturing field, and you have Toyota, the Toyota production systems, all of these in some way have a connection to the field of system dynamics. So it looked like manifestations of system dynamics, but in their own fields. And that's how I started seeing the system. But once you start seeing the system, you realize that the underlying principles are not so vast that you feel overwhelmed. It's the same set of principles that apply everywhere. And I'm no longer overwhelmed by all the advice that I keep reading on Twitter and LinkedIn, etc., because I see it and I see what they are trying to save and how they are trying to modify the system, but they are giving a very specific angle to it. But I know what under all of that, what is going to happen. So when I now work with my teams, the first thing I do is, it's not possible that their journey might take the same path. And so I make sure that they see the system with a lot of examples that happen. So I start telling them, when you start to look at a system, there are certain ways in which you can model it. There are certain diagrams that you can draw it. And when you start drawing these diagrams across different fields, the diagrams all look the same. So whether you're doing it for supply chain, or whether you're doing it for sales, or whether you're doing it for product management, by the diagrams, it is like a line connecting to a point, kind of a chain of influences, chain of cause and reaction, those kind of diagrams. Those look exactly the same. And so if you understand how a particular, and those certain diagrams, patterns of those diagrams are called archetypes, system archetypes. If you understand some of these archetypes, you're able to quickly predict what is going to happen in your system when you see some of these changes happening. So as soon as some of these changes happening, I understand how the system is going to adapt and modify itself very quickly. So if I see someone making a certain decisions around, let's say, lead allocation, I understand how the system is going to behave because of the cause and relation, and I understand most of the time this is the behavior that is going to emerge. So maybe 4 or 5 months down the line, I know this is going to happen. Somewhere I write it down, because even if I get overruled, I can go and use it as an way to educate. This is how the system actually evolved. And so when you work with your team, and most of your conversations also happen knowing that he knows the system and he or she sees the system as you do. It's just a matter of how you see the system, and you're seeing the same system together. It's easy to have the conversation faster. And the more you do this with that in back of your mind, like, it's a system, you have to be able to see the system, and you have to be able to see the causes and the agents in the system, the faster and you're able to communicate things with each other, and you're able to understand each other much better, because your decisions they can figure out why you're taking certain decisions, and you can see why they are taking certain decisions. It comes down to the same way of looking at the problem. So just working with them on it, but initially giving them that first set of examples, first set of books, etc., to read, so that later on it becomes they've already started looking at it in a certain way. I might be faster because I'm a bit ahead in their journey, but they catch up very quickly.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for suggesting those books as well. So Joe, I've been following whatever you've been writing on Substack, and on one of your posts on Substack, you mentioned that behaviors emerge in systems, right? And you were saying it before as well, that behaviors start playing out in a system or in a org or in a team when different parts of a system interact, right? And you explain this with the help of a interesting concept called the capability trap, right? And this sounds super interesting. And both Nikunj and I have observed this phenomenon, right? So drawing from your experience, talk to us about what actually is the capability trap.
Got it. So the capability trap is a name given to a certain pattern of behavior. And like I said, across systems, the same set of patterns of behavior start to emerge. And I mean, nothing invented by me. I'm just regurgitating what better people have said. And they have given names to these same patterns of behavior across industries. And one of them, a very well-studied one, is called a capability trap. And of course, the original examples are from manufacturing. And in my post, I had written, try to modify it for product management and product development. I'll start with the manufacturing one, because it's better in a sense. At least I've read more on it. Let's say you have a factory and you have machines to produce goods. When you keep those machines running, you keep producing those goods. So you're putting efforts. Your effort is to keep the machines running. But as those machines run, it requires maintenance, and if you don't do regular maintenance, it starts breaking down. If you don't do preventive maintenance, it starts breaking down, and your production goes down. So maintenance is required to keep the production output at a certain level. You have to have. So you have to split your effort into some part into maintenance and some part into delivering the output. Now, let's say a manager comes in, or your competitor starts to do much better, and the targets go up for the factory to increase production. Now, if the factory production manager decides that we will initially increase the production by reducing the effort that we put on men, of course, that extra initial effort that goes from maintenance to production will increase your output a bit. So it will look as if they are going to deliver the goods and the company is doing better, the factory is doing better. But over a period of time, the lack of maintenance, preventive maintenance, is going to catch up. And what that does is then the machine starts to break and they are in maintenance much longer. So your production goes down. And so you're not meeting the goals anymore. And so if the production manager sees that, I'm not meeting the goals, I need to increase production more. And if his intuition is to, I was doing X amount of maintenance now, let's reduce it further so that my production goes up, you're into that trap. You had a capability to deliver certain output, but you're taking away from that capability, you're not maintaining that capability, and you're and that's the capability trap, where you're not putting enough effort to keep your capability at a certain rate because you have to meet outputs, but because you're not doing that, you're not meeting the outputs anymore. The analogy from product development is something similar to your code base. There can be many analogies. One is to your code base. When you start writing your code, of course, it's going to be clean and all, but as the code base increases, there will be many parts which are not so well written. So your code quality in a way goes down. As more people come in, your code quality starts deteriorating. Now you have to put in effort to keep your code base structured, rewrite it in a certain way so that new people who come in are able to understand it faster. So that's extra effort. It does nothing to your for your users. It does nothing to make them see any new feature, but it does help the new person to come in and be more proactive faster. So the effort that you put in to keep the code base clean and the quality high helps in keeping the efficiency high, throughout. But let's say at some point someone comes in, and it's always someone comes in, and at least we are independent agents. People are the independent agents here. They take decisions. So if someone comes in and says, let's focus on delivering something faster. And unfortunately, the team decides that the way to do it is to not keep the code, not to do the regular code-based maintenance, but to take that effort and put it into delivering those features. Over a period of time, that kind of effort will lead to more mess in the code base. The new person who joins in, or the new features that have to be developed, is going to take longer because it's definitely not written in a well-designed manner. And then slowly your capability to deliver the code goes down, bugs increase, and then you're into that capability trap feature. So it's the same archetype, the same set of mechanisms at work, manufacturing, product development. You see it in sales also, especially when it comes to lead management. Salespeople have to keep talking to the leads before a sale happens. So you have to warm them up, you have to get them, explain the product to them. But let's say you suddenly have in 15 days, you need to get a lot of extra revenue target. You'll stop working on the leads which are cold. You'll stop working on the leads which have just come in. You'll put all your efforts into the ones which you have already spoken to. Over the next 15 days, you'll close a lot of them. But after those 15 days, you have a bunch of leads which you have never spoken to. Now it's going to take you much longer to get them warmed up and ready to buy your product. So your capability went down. So that's a capability trap in sales. It's the same dynamics. You draw the causal loop. It looks the same across all these domains.
One follow-up question I have: can you give an example from your days at probably Toppr or at GetEpic? Because typically in startups which are very early stage, things basically tend to break as well, right? And that's where your system thinking comes, very handy there, right? And maybe a capability trap which you would have identified being a product leader in your previous org or in your current org, that would be greatly helpful.
We went through this process multiple times at Toppr. Been there long enough to have seen this multiple times happening. Sometimes you're able to even see it happening and not able to do anything because, of course, the external pressures are such that you have to do it. It's a repercussion that you're going to face soon, especially in sales. So I've seen it happen multiple times. On the product code base also, we have a feature called, of course, now it's part of the Byju's group. The doubts on chat feature was there. There were certain decisions that we took to build it in a certain way early on. It was a decision, let's say, technically it was not the most well designed, but it was the easiest for us to go live with, and we went live with it. and building anything more on top of it was taking longer and longer over a period of time. So after a year, it became almost to a point where there was no way we even knew where the bugs were going to come from. So it would happen that you are having a chat with a teacher, your messages reach the teacher after she closes a chat, and then she opens a chat again. And so there were a lot of edge cases, etc., happening because we did not spend the initial time to build out a system capability, and we just kept building on it. We knew that it was there, but we said this feature is taking off really well. It was one of the most popular features. We decided it was more important to deliver to the customer right away than to go fix the code base and take more time on doing it. But we reached a point where we could no longer build it, and we then spent almost 3 months to rewrite it from scratch because it reached a point, the machine broke down to a point where you had to throw it out and buy new machines. So we wrote the whole code base again, but of course with all the learnings. And after that, we never faced a problem because we knew we had designed it well. And every time we worked on it, it was the same team. We usually have the same team working on something for a long time. So they knew everything that had happened. And so their designs going forward always took into consideration how the code base is going to evolve. Yeah, it happened. Sometimes it happens and it's happening. Everyone knows it's happening, but of course you decide that you will deal with the repercussions later on.
Correct. I think go-to-market is obviously sacrosanct in very early stages, and that's when you have to take a call that let's ship it and then put systems in place as soon as possible.
Right.
One interesting thing which you mentioned is the concept of a causal loop diagram, right? Can you explain that? Can you deep dive on it a bit?
Now, when I keep saying systems, at the heart of it, systems are basically individual parts that work together to achieve certain goal, or to just, each of them might have their own goals, but they all work together in a certain way. That if a certain part doesn't work, then the system's behavior changes completely. So they are all working together. Now, there are maybe many ways to model this, to show to figure out. When I say model, it means to say this is what's happening and I predict something to happen. So your model need not be complete, but your prediction should be useful in a certain way. And two very frequently used approaches is a stock and flow diagram and the causal loop diagram. The stock and flow diagram is a very intensive way where I'll keep it aside for now. The causal loop diagram is more useful for someone who's doing it on the fly, has to do it regularly in different areas, and you're not being very academic about it. You don't really care of by how much amount this particular factor changes and how much amount the other factor changes. So you're not worried about the details of it. There is a relationship. So in a causal loop diagram, you start thinking of, let's say you have a factor A. When that variable changes, it is going to affect another variable. And so you have a diagram of variable A affecting variable B, affecting variable C, and then suddenly you find that the variable C also goes back and affects variable A. So you have a loop of causes: cause, effect, cause, effect, cause, effect. For example, in the PRD one, you saw that longer PRDs, slower dev cycles, more stress. You want to safeguard your peace of mind. So the dev team says, give me better PRDs before I start. So you have a loop that has happened. And so this is a reinforcing loop. If variable A increases, the loop goes back and says, increase it even more. So A just keeps on increasing. And there is an alternate, there's a different kind of loop where it says if A increases, the loop goes and says decrease A. So it's a balancing loop. It brings down A. So the loop brings down the value of A. Most of the time, all these loops, there may be multiple balancing loops, multiple reinforcing loops. For example, the Amazon's flywheel, it is a reinforcing loop. And you see more customers, more products, more customers, more products, etc. That reinforcing loop. It's a good marketing tactic that they completely ignored any reinforcing loop that says, any balancing loop that says, that's not going to happen indefinitely. These loops interact, and you will usually not have the system just keeping on increasing in a certain way. Either it increases and breaks down, something breaks down completely, or to a break point, or you have something where the balancing loop brings down the effect in a certain way that stabilizes. So that's when you draw these on the on a paper, that's like a causal diagram. All right.
Just slightly changing the topic here, Joe. Think of like obviously you starting a new year, looking at the next, let's say 3-4 quarters, right? I want to understand, how do you like plan your product roadmap? I have seen like different people have like percentages or ratios in which they try to like split big bets versus like ongoing things, especially in an environment wherein sales or marketing has a lot of ask, right? Just wanted to understand if you have like a 10,000 feet framework of, hey, I have 100 things to build. I'll try to prioritize A over B. And how do you sort of go about looking at product strategy and product road mapping? And obviously, at a 50,000 feet view, like planning the year in advance.
Yeah. There are two types of roadmap that, one is where you need certainty. When a sales team says, I will deliver something to the customer, they want the certainty that they can deliver it. So you need some roadmaps which have a certainty. For example, in our case, when Epic is selling to schools, it's a new product that we have started only for US schools. We go to them, we tell them, by this academic year, when your academic year starts and our contract begins, we will have these features in place. So it's something that needs to have certainty in it. And there you need to work backwards to ensure the certainty is there that you will deliver it. And you have to allocate your resources in a certain way. It's a negotiation where you say, I don't want to put all my resources into ensuring that the certainty exists. So let's not promise all of this by so and so, because I need to put something aside for my other work. But there are some work where you need certainty, and you work in a way where you say that it's a fixed effort thing. I'm going to do it. I know. To be able to say something with certainty, on your side also, you should not have any unknowns. It's not like with certainty I'll deliver 10x results or 10x user growth. That's not a certainty. You don't know all the factors that go in, but you can deliver features with a certainty. You cannot deliver outcomes with a certainty. So when you're saying I will deliver features, you can have a certain certainty in saying that yes, I can deliver it, and you might keep aside a certain bandwidth for it. There are other things where you don't have certainty. Those are goals that you have, outcomes that you want to achieve. My preferred way, and I think my preferred way, because I think it is the best way for me, at least with my outlook and my team's outlook, etc., is to define the effort in terms of the pods. So when I say I have a certain pod, a pod is a team. It's a self-contained team, product managers, engineers, designers, everyone working together. They know that they're on it full time, or at least they know how much effort they're going to do. Ideally, all the engineers should be on it full time, designers also on it full time. Product managers sometimes have two pods with them. But that means that if a pod is working on something, that is a bandwidth that I've allocated on solving a certain problem. So I allocate effort on a certain problem. Whether or not I'm able to achieve all the results that I plan to, I'm not sure. So these are bets that I take, and I put my bets in proportion to where I think the outcomes will be. So there will be something which I think is going to be a big outcome and a very certain one. Then I'm willing to put a higher effort, larger or two pods on it. If it's something that I don't think it's the less certain something is, I might put a smaller team on it, because I don't want to. I want to see a certainty come in before I put more of my bets on it. So I take a more fluid approach to roadmap, and that works in startups, and that works in growing companies where things are changing quite frequently. But in larger organizations where certainty is a prized commodity, your directors wants you to give a certainty by which you will deliver something. They also have to give a plan, and they're all held accountable to what they say. So it takes a form of, I think someone had used it, John Cutler, maybe, a term called certainty theater. They all say, I will deliver it with a certainty of, this will happen, but it's just, it's really, they don't have the certainty to say that. They cannot say with certainty that it is going to happen, but they all behave, everyone behaves as if someone has said it will happen, and everyone has just bought into that mindset. And so my roadmaps are mostly around bets, which is bet 1, bet 2, bet 3. On bet 1, I have one pod, bet 2, I have one pod, bet 3, I have one pod. working on it. So that's my approach to roadmaps. And these bets are usually longer ones because the pod should not change. What happens is the pod learns the problem, and their initial month might not be a very good output one, but as they learn, they become much better and much more efficient on that problem. So you want the pod to run on a problem for a much longer time, so that they learn as a team. They learn, the individual product manager learns, the engineers learn, they all learn, they come to a point where they get really good at it, and that's where the output starts coming up.
Awesome. I really like when last time also we talked, and today also you keep emphasizing that the pods shouldn't change, and I think the more the pod stays longer, the better the system dynamics become as well, right? In terms of solving a problem together, so to say. But yeah, thanks a lot, Joe, for giving time to us. This brings us to the end of the podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to create a systems thinking 101 repository with PM School. And thank you so much, Joe, for your time.
Thank you so much for calling me, and I hope I really hope there are more people talking about this, because I found it to be very helpful to think in systems. I think it will help others too.
Absolutely.